The luxury flight cabin hummed softly as it cruised high above the clouds. Ethan sat in his first-class seat, a calm expression on his face, his thoughts distant. A successful tech entrepreneur, his wealth was a result of years of determination, struggles, and late nights. His journey from poverty to riches had made him resilient, unshakable. But still, there was a part of him that could never shake the feeling of being an outsider in a world that often judged him for the color of his skin. Jessica, on the other hand, was seated just a few rows away, her gaze fixed outside the window. The world she inhabited was nothing like Ethan's. Raised in a life of privilege, she had been shielded from the harsh realities of life outside her social circle. Her father's wealth had opened doors for her, giving her access to the elite spaces that Ethan had to fight his way into. She never thought much about the world beyond her own, until now. Their paths had crossed in a way neither of them could have anticipated. When the flight attendant asked if they wanted to switch seats, Jessica was quick to decline when she noticed Ethan sitting beside her. His presence made her uneasy, though she couldn't pinpoint why. It wasn't an overt dislike, but a hesitation, one rooted deep within her that she wasn't even fully aware of. As the plane ascended into the sky, the space between them seemed to grow wider. Ethan noticed her reluctance, the way her body stiffened when she realized they would be sharing the same row. He had encountered similar situations before, and though it stung, he didn't let it show. He had learned the art of silence, of non-confrontation. For him, it was just another reminder of how people like Jessica often saw him, not for who he was, but for how he looked. The flight was long, and the hours dragged by, filled with awkward silences and uncomfortable glances. Ethan, ever the professional, focused on his laptop, working on an upcoming speech for a global tech summit. Meanwhile, Jessica, though attempting to ignore him, couldn't help but notice the quiet confidence in his demeanor. She hadn't realized until now how much she had misjudged him. The tension between Jessica and Ethan lingered in the air, thick and palpable. The longer they sat there in silence, the more Jessica's unease grew. She glanced over at Ethan, noticing how his sharp features seemed to be carved from stone, his jawline defined, his eyes focused. There was something about him that caught her attention, something she couldn't place. Yet, despite his quiet composure, she couldn't help but feel a sense of superiority bubble up inside her. She shifted in her seat, adjusting the hem of her designer dress as if it could somehow put distance between them. Her thoughts drifted back to her life back home. Parties, the family business, everything wrapped in the comfort of privilege. Ethan's presence felt like a stark contrast to all of that. His casual yet expensive attire spoke of a different world, one she wasn't used to. Ethan, on the other hand, had grown used to the subtle glances, the sideways looks, the quiet judgment. It wasn't new. He'd faced it all his life. People who assumed that his success was a fluke or that he didn't belong. But as much as the world around him tried to define him by the color of his skin, Ethan had made sure to define himself by his achievements. Yet, in this cramped cabin, in the presence of a woman like Jessica, those old feelings of rejection crept back, just below the surface. His thoughts were interrupted by the flight attendant approaching with a drink cart. As the attendant passed, Jessica gave a polite smile, asking for a glass of wine. Ethan ordered a sparkling water, his tone calm, detached. The attendant made a quick exit, leaving the two of them alone once more. For a moment, Jessica considered apologizing, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she? It wasn't just about the seat. There was something more beneath her discomfort, something deeper that she didn't want to confront. The truth was, she had prejudged Ethan based on his appearance, never once considering that he might be more than the man sitting next to her. Her mind raced as she searched for a way to bridge the gap that had formed between them, but it was as if the space between them had only grown wider. Ethan didn't seem bothered by her coldness. He was used to it. But something in his gaze flickered. A flicker of something he couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was a moment of vulnerability, a crack in his usually unshakable exterior. As the hours ticked by, the atmosphere between Jessica and Ethan remained charged with unspoken tension. The flight's descent into turbulence made the cabin shake slightly, and for a moment, both of them instinctively gripped their armrests. Ethan glanced at Jessica, noticing how her fingers tightened around the seat, her expression a mix of discomfort and fear. She hadn't said a word to him the entire time, but in that fleeting moment, their shared unease was palpable. Ethan had always been someone who thrived under pressure. He was used to high-stakes situations, negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, facing investors with impossible demands, and dealing with the pressure of his fast-paced life. But there was something about this woman sitting beside him that unsettled him in ways he hadn't expected. It wasn't just her reserved nature, it was her unwillingness to see beyond her own preconceived notions. Jessica, however, was struggling with her own inner conflict. As much as she wanted to keep her distance, a part of her couldn't help but wonder about Ethan. The longer she sat beside him, the more her curiosity grew. She found herself stealing glances at him, noticing the faint hint of tension in his jawline, the way his fingers idly tapped on the armrest, as if working through something in his mind. He didn't seem like the man she had first judged him to be. Finally, the turbulence subsided, and the flight returned to calm. The soft hum of the plane's engines filled the silence between them. Jessica couldn't ignore the feeling that had been gnawing at her for the past few hours. The realization was uncomfortable but undeniable. She had unfairly judged Ethan based on his appearance. She had judged him before even knowing who he was, and now she found herself questioning everything she had believed about herself. A part of her wanted to break the silence, to acknowledge the awkwardness and perhaps even apologize. But pride held her back, keeping her tongue tied. Instead, she pretended to be absorbed in her magazine, hoping to block out the growing guilt that tugged at her chest. Ethan, sensing the shift in the air, remained silent. He could feel her eyes on him, but he wasn't about to make the first move. He had learned long ago that people like Jessica didn't apologize. They didn't need to. They lived in a world where people like him were invisible, unless they were of use. The flight was nearing its destination, and the final stretch was met with an uneasy quiet between Jessica and Ethan. The time they had spent together had felt like an eternity, and yet it had only been a few hours. Jessica's mind was racing with thoughts she didn't want to confront. Ethan's presence was far more unsettling than she had anticipated. The doubts that had once felt like whispers in her mind were now screaming at her, forcing her to reconsider everything she had ever known about herself. She stole another glance at him. Ethan was staring out the window, his face calm, collected, as if nothing about this situation fazed him. He exuded a sense of power, not in an overt way, but in a quiet, undeniable manner. It was as if he had learned to be comfortable in his own skin, something Jessica envied in ways she didn't fully understand. Her fingers nervously brushed through her hair as she tried to compose herself. The reality was, she didn't know how to react. She had lived a life where she was always in control, always surrounded by people who were similar to her, people who looked like her, thought like her, and shared the same social circles. But Ethan, he was different. And that difference scared her. Ethan had started to notice the subtle shifts in Jessica's behavior. He had always been a keen observer, able to read people in ways they didn't even realize. He had seen the unease in her eyes earlier, the tension that gripped her every time she was near him. But he wasn't angry. He understood. People like Jessica often didn't know any better, and he wasn't about to be offended by something so ingrained in society. But even he couldn't deny the curiosity that had started to form within him. There was something about her that intrigued him. She wasn't like the others he had encountered, those who would judge him from the moment he entered the room. Jessica, despite her discomfort, wasn't overtly cruel. She was just unsure. It was a strange thing, being the subject of someone's doubt. It wasn't something he was used to. As the plane began its descent into the city, the captain's voice came over the loudspeaker, breaking the silence. "We're beginning our descent into New York City. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing." Jessica and Ethan both buckled their seatbelts, and for the first time during the flight, their eyes met. There was no tension, no animosity, just a quiet understanding. But for Jessica, that understanding came with a painful realization. She had judged him, and in doing so, had revealed more about herself than she ever intended. As the plane touched down on the runway, the usual excitement of reaching a new city seemed to pass by unnoticed for Jessica. The bright lights of New York were always welcoming, but tonight, something felt different. There was an unexpected heaviness in the air, as if the weight of the past few hours had settled deep within her chest. Ethan, on the other hand, appeared unfazed. He simply grabbed his bag, preparing to exit the plane with his usual calm demeanor. Jessica couldn't shake the unease that had grown inside her. Her mind kept returning to the moments when she had silently judged him, when she had thought less of him simply because he didn't fit into the life she was accustomed to. She wanted to believe she wasn't that person, the one who judged others based on appearances. But the truth was, she had been that person. And it hurt. As she walked down the aisle, she hesitated for a moment, glancing toward Ethan. He was already at the front, his back to her, walking with the quiet confidence that seemed to come so naturally to him. She quickly looked away, too embarrassed to meet his gaze. But there was a nagging thought in her mind that she couldn't ignore. What if she had misjudged him? What if her assumptions had been completely wrong? The thought lingered in her mind as she exited the plane, but there was no time to dwell on it. The moment they stepped off the jet bridge and into the terminal, Jessica's father's assistant, a sharp-looking woman named Laura, greeted her with a smile. "Miss Jessica, we have a car waiting for you outside." Jessica forced a smile, nodding in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Laura." She turned to look around the terminal, her gaze briefly landing on Ethan again, who was talking to the baggage handler. He was just another passenger to the world, yet in that moment, he seemed so much more. Ethan wasn't just someone who had been in her seat on the plane. He was someone with a story, a life that held more depth than she could have ever imagined in her shallow, privileged world. Ethan, unaware of Jessica's internal struggle, continued to make his way toward the exit. His thoughts, however, were far from the bustling airport. He had business to attend to, meetings that would take up his time in the city. But as much as he tried to ignore it, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between him and Jessica. She had been so distant, so cold, yet there had been moments, small moments, when he saw a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. For now, he pushed the thought aside. There were bigger things to focus on. But as he walked toward the exit, he couldn't help but wonder if their paths would cross again. The next morning, Jessica woke up to the bustling energy of New York City. The light filtered in through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the room. Her head ached slightly, a reminder of the emotional chaos that had unfolded the night before. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan, the way he had looked at her, calm, composed, unaffected by her initial coldness. The thoughts made her uncomfortable. He was nothing like the people she was used to, and that realization stung more than she cared to admit. She reached for her phone, scrolling through emails and messages, trying to push the thoughts of him to the back of her mind. But it was no use. They kept creeping back in. Her finger hovered over the screen as her inbox continued to fill up with notifications. Work, business, her father's endless expectations. These were things she could control. But Ethan, he was a mystery, and mysteries were never easy to ignore. After a quick shower and a rushed breakfast, Jessica stepped out of her apartment and into the sleek black car waiting for her. As she sat in the back, watching the city pass by, her mind kept drifting back to the flight. She had judged him based on nothing more than his appearance, and now she couldn't help but wonder what kind of man he really was. Was he someone she could connect with? Or was he just another reminder of how out of touch she had become with the world outside her privileged bubble? Meanwhile, Ethan was already deep into his day. He had meetings lined up, and he knew that today would be one of those days where nothing went according to plan. But that was the nature of his world, fast-paced, unpredictable, and often ruthless. As he sat in the back of his own car, heading toward a high-stakes meeting, his thoughts briefly flickered back to Jessica. He didn't know why, but something about her had stuck with him. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. It was her reserve, the walls she had built around herself. He saw through them, and it intrigued him. The city was full of distractions, but for some reason, he couldn't shake the feeling that his path and Jessica's would cross again. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but something told him that when their paths did cross again, it wouldn't be as simple as it had been on the flight. The next morning, Jessica woke up to the bustling energy of New York City. The light filtered in through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the room. Her head ached slightly, a reminder of the emotional chaos that had unfolded the night before. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan, the way he had looked at her, calm, composed, unaffected by her initial coldness. The thoughts made her uncomfortable. He was nothing like the people she was used to, and that realization stung more than she cared to admit. She reached for her phone, scrolling through emails and messages, trying to push the thoughts of him to the back of her mind. But it was no use. They kept creeping back in. Her finger hovered over the screen as her inbox continued to fill up with notifications. Work, business, her father's endless expectations. These were things she could control, but Ethan, he was a mystery, and mysteries were never easy to ignore. After a quick shower and a rushed breakfast, Jessica stepped out of her apartment and into the sleek black car waiting for her. As she sat in the back, watching the city pass by, her mind kept drifting back to the flight. She had judged him based on nothing more than his appearance, and now she couldn't help but wonder what kind of man he really was. Was he someone she could connect with? Or was he just another reminder of how out of touch she had become with the world outside her privileged bubble? Meanwhile, Ethan was already deep into his day. He had meetings lined up, and he knew that today would be one of those days where nothing went according to plan. But that was the nature of his world, fast-paced, unpredictable, and often ruthless. As he sat in the back of his own car, heading toward a high-stakes meeting, his thoughts briefly flickered back to Jessica. He didn't know why, but something about her had stuck with him. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. It was her reserve, the walls she had built around herself. He saw through them, and it intrigued him. The city was full of distractions, but for some reason, he couldn't shake the feeling that his path and Jessica's would cross again. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but something told him that when their paths did cross again, it wouldn't be as simple as it had been on the flight. Jessica sat at her father's office in the heart of New York City, surrounded by polished glass walls and sleek modern furniture. The view from the window was breathtaking. The skyline stretched for miles, but for Jessica, it was just a reminder of the world she had been born into. A world that was beautiful on the outside but hollow on the inside. Her father, the successful businessman, had always expected her to follow in his footsteps, to be just like him, driven, powerful, and untouchable. But today, for the first time, she felt disconnected from that world. Her mind kept returning to Ethan, to that strange encounter on the plane. He wasn't part of her world, and yet, there was something about him that made her question everything. Her thoughts were interrupted as her father walked into the office, his commanding presence filling the room. "Jessica, we need to talk about the new project proposal," he said, his voice sharp. "I need your full attention today. No distractions." Jessica nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't focus on work. Every time she tried, Ethan's face kept resurfacing in her thoughts. The way he carried himself with such ease, the way he had stood up to her, unbothered by her dismissive attitude. It was a stark contrast to everything she had ever known. She hated it, hated how she had underestimated him. "Jessica," her father snapped, bringing her back to the present. "Did you hear me? This project could be a game changer for our company. We need your input." "Sorry, Dad. I'm just thinking," she said, trying to gather her thoughts. "I'll be fine. We'll get to the project." Her father gave her a long look, but he didn't press the issue. He knew how to read her moods, how to sense when something was off. "You've been distracted a lot lately. You're not yourself." Jessica forced a smile, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk. "I'm fine, Dad. Really." But deep down, she knew she wasn't. She wasn't fine at all. And the more she tried to push the thoughts of Ethan away, the more she realized they were only growing stronger. She was starting to crave the connection she had felt with him, even if it had only been for a few moments. And it scared her. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Laura. "The meeting with Ethan's company is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. You might want to prepare." Her heart skipped a beat. Ethan. Tomorrow. The next day, Jessica found herself pacing back and forth in her apartment, trying to calm the rising tension in her chest. The message from Laura had stirred something inside her. She was going to meet Ethan's company today. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. She knew this meeting was important for her father's business, but it had become so much more than just business. It was a chance to face Ethan again, to see if he was truly the person she had started to believe he might be. She glanced at the clock. It was almost time to leave. Jessica took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Today wasn't just about business. It was about the strange connection she felt with him, one that seemed to grow stronger the more she tried to suppress it. There was no turning back now. As she stepped into the sleek black car waiting for her outside, she noticed the city looked different today. The morning sun gleamed off the buildings, casting a golden glow on everything. But all Jessica could focus on was what was ahead. Ethan, the man who had broken down her walls in a way no one ever had. When she arrived at the meeting venue, her heart was racing. Ethan's office building was one of the tallest in the area, an impressive structure of glass and steel. The moment she walked into the lobby, she felt the weight of the place. It was modern, luxurious, and undeniably powerful. She took a deep breath and made her way to the elevator, the anticipation building with each floor she passed. As the elevator doors opened, Jessica found herself face to face with Ethan. He was standing there, looking as composed as ever, a faint smile playing on his lips. It was the first time they had seen each other since the flight, and in that moment, all the walls she had built up began to crumble. "Jessica," he said smoothly, his voice deep and calm. "I didn't expect to see you here." Jessica forced a smile, her heart pounding in her chest. "Neither did I," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wasn't sure what to expect, but here we are." They exchanged a brief, polite handshake before stepping into the conference room, the weight of their past encounter hanging between them like an unspoken tension. As the meeting progressed, Jessica found herself listening intently, but her mind kept drifting to Ethan. There was something magnetic about him, something she couldn't quite place but couldn't deny either. The meeting stretched on for what felt like hours. Jessica tried to focus on the numbers, the projections, the strategy they were discussing, but all she could think about was Ethan sitting across from her with that calm, steady gaze. His presence was undeniable, even though he barely said anything during the meeting. When he did speak, his words were direct, measured, nothing like the quick-witted, playful banter from the flight. This was business, and Jessica couldn't help but feel out of her depth. As the meeting finally came to an end, Jessica stood up, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment. She had managed to keep her composure throughout, but the tension in the room hadn't gone unnoticed. Ethan's eyes lingered on her for a second longer than necessary, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest. It was as if he could read her thoughts, her uncertainties, and he wasn't giving her the answers she was craving. "That went well," Ethan said, breaking the silence as they walked toward the door. Jessica nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, it did. Your team seems really capable." He smiled back, but there was something else behind it, something deeper, more knowing. "Thanks, Jessica. But you were the one who nailed the proposal. I wasn't expecting such an innovative approach." She couldn't tell if he was being sincere or just being polite, but for the first time, she noticed something in his eyes that made her pause. It wasn't just admiration or respect. It was something more. A quiet challenge, maybe. A recognition of her potential. She didn't know how to respond. "So," he continued, shifting the conversation, "do you want to grab a drink? Maybe talk about this more? Or just, catch up?" Jessica hesitated, her mind racing. She had been fighting this attraction, this pull toward him, but the more time she spent with him, the more she felt like she was losing the battle. She couldn't let her guard down, not in a world where everything was driven by appearances and power. "I think I'm good for today," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've got some work to catch up on." But even as she said it, she knew she was lying to herself. She didn't want to leave. Not really. Ethan raised an eyebrow, as if sensing her hesitation. "Another time then," he said with a knowing smile. "I'll be around." As he walked away, Jessica felt a strange emptiness settle in her chest. She had walked away from him, but the question was, why? The days that followed felt like a blur to Jessica. The meeting with Ethan had lingered in her mind, haunting her thoughts at the most unexpected times. She had pushed it aside as just another work-related interaction, but deep down, she knew it was something more. His presence, his charisma, it was magnetic, unavoidable. And yet, she couldn't understand why she felt so drawn to him. Her phone buzzed on her desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Laura. "Meeting with Ethan's team is in 2 days. Don't forget the prep." Jessica rolled her eyes. She wasn't forgetting, but the reminder felt like a chain wrapped around her wrist, pulling her back into the cycle of business meetings, endless projections, and corporate discussions. But as much as she wanted to ignore it, her mind wandered back to Ethan. That evening, as she sat at her desk, trying to focus on work, a knock on her office door interrupted her. She looked up, surprised to see her father standing there, his expression unreadable. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." Jessica frowned. "About what?" "About Ethan," he said, his tone serious. "You know his family's reputation, don't you?" Jessica blinked, taken aback. "Ethan? What about him?" Her father leaned against her desk, his eyes scanning her face, searching for something. "His family has a long history in this city. They're not just a business empire. They're connected, involved in things far beyond the boardroom. And you need to be careful." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean by careful?" Her father's gaze softened, but there was a warning in it. "I'm not saying anything bad about him, but in our world, nothing is ever as it seems. His charm, his connection, it's all part of the game. Just be cautious. Don't get too close." Jessica felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Was her father right? Was Ethan just another player in the game of power and influence? The thought unsettled her, but she couldn't deny that her attraction to him was growing stronger. Could he really be as dangerous as her father implied? The following day, Jessica couldn't shake the conversation she had with her father. His warning about Ethan kept echoing in her mind. Was he just another player in a world of manipulation and power? Or was there something real about him that she hadn't yet discovered? She spent the entire day buried in work, trying to focus on the numbers and presentations for the upcoming meeting with Ethan's team. But her thoughts kept drifting back to him. His gaze, the subtle smirk, the way he made her feel like she was the only person in the room when he spoke to her. It was confusing, frustrating even, but she couldn't ignore the pull. That evening, as she walked out of her office, she received a message from Ethan. "I know you've been busy, but how about grabbing a coffee tomorrow? Let's talk more about the proposal." Jessica stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. Should she go? Should she risk letting down her guard? Her father's warning was fresh in her mind, but something about Ethan made her want to know more. She couldn't keep running from it. She replied, "All right, coffee tomorrow at 3. The next afternoon, they met at a small, quiet cafe tucked away on a side street. It wasn't the usual trendy spot where business deals were struck, but it felt right. More personal, more intimate. Jessica arrived first, her nerves buzzing as she took a seat by the window, her eyes scanning the street outside. A few minutes later, Ethan walked in. He was dressed casually, a sharp contrast to the power suits he wore in the office. His presence was still commanding, though, his confident stride drawing the eyes of everyone in the cafe. He spotted her immediately and smiled, his gaze softening for a moment as he approached her table. "Hey," he said, sitting down across from her. "You look like you're waiting for a verdict." Jessica laughed, but the tension was still there, unspoken, lingering in the air between them. "I guess I am," she replied, trying to keep her voice light. "But you'll have to wait and see if you get a good review." He chuckled, leaning forward slightly. "I'll take my chances." His smile was warm, but there was a hint of something deeper in his eyes, something that made her heart race, despite her best efforts to stay composed. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly. And yet, with every passing moment, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden beneath the surface. There was a side to Ethan she hadn't yet seen, a side that she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The days after her coffee with Ethan passed in a blur, and Jessica couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew her in despite her better judgment. She had spent so many years building her career, focusing on her independence, and yet, with him, she felt like she was losing control. At work, she tried to keep her distance, focusing on the upcoming presentation and the strategies she had developed. But even then, her thoughts kept drifting to Ethan. He had been respectful, charming, but there was always that sense of hidden layers beneath his words. One morning, as she arrived at her office, she found a small package waiting for her. There was no return address, only a note that read, "I think you might need this." Her heart skipped a beat. She opened it to reveal a leather-bound journal, elegant and simple, with a gold pen lying neatly beside it. She turned the journal over, and there was something etched on the back. "For your next big idea." Jessica's mind raced. Who would send this to her? The handwriting was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Was this another gesture from Ethan? Had he been paying attention in their conversations? She picked up her phone and dialed his number before she could second-guess herself. "Ethan," she said when he answered, trying to sound casual, but her voice betrayed her. "Did you send me something?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke, his tone was unexpectedly soft. "I did. I thought it might help you with whatever project you're working on." Jessica frowned, still trying to make sense of it all. "And what exactly am I supposed to do with it?" He chuckled, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Maybe it'll give you a little inspiration. You've got a lot of potential, Jessica. I want to see you reach it." His words hit her harder than she expected. There was something about his sincerity that shook her. She had always been so guarded, so focused on her goals, and yet, here was someone who seemed to believe in her in a way no one else had. But why? Was he truly looking out for her? Or was there something more to this? Her heart tugged with both curiosity and fear. Jessica sat in her office, staring at the journal Ethan had sent her. She ran her fingers over the smooth leather cover, her mind racing. What did it mean? Was it just a thoughtful gift, or was there more to it? His words echoed in her mind. "I want to see you reach it." She had always prided herself on her independence, her ability to rise on her own merits. But there was something about Ethan that made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. He wasn't like the other men she had dealt with in her professional life. He wasn't just another player in the game. Was he? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. She quickly hid the journal in her drawer, not wanting to seem too distracted. "Come in," she called, and Laura walked in with a stack of papers in her hand. "Hey, got the latest updates on the proposal for Ethan's team," Laura said, dropping the papers on Jessica's desk. "Are you okay? You've been a little off lately." Jessica forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little overwhelmed with everything." Laura raised an eyebrow. "It's that Ethan, isn't it?" Jessica looked up, surprised. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, please, Jessica," Laura said, sitting down across from her. "I've known you for years. You're acting different. I can see it. The way you talk about him, the way you look when his name comes up. It's clear there's something more there." Jessica felt her face flush. She had tried to keep her feelings for Ethan hidden, but it was becoming harder to deny. "It's complicated," she said quietly. "I bet it is," Laura said with a knowing look. "But you're not the type to let something like that distract you. What's going on?" Jessica hesitated. She didn't want to admit it, but the truth was that she didn't fully understand her own emotions. Ethan had become a puzzle, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to figure him out. "I don't know, Laura," she finally said, leaning back in her chair. "He's different, and I can't seem to shake the feeling that he's hiding something." Laura's expression softened. "Be careful, Jess. Men like him don't just walk into your life without a reason. There's always something more beneath the surface." Jessica nodded, but her thoughts were still with Ethan. What was he hiding? And more importantly, why did she feel like she was falling for him, despite all the warning signs? The following morning, Jessica couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her gut. She had spent all night thinking about Ethan, about the journal, about everything that had been said and done. But there was something else she couldn't ignore. The unease that she was missing something crucial. As she sat at her desk, sorting through the latest data for the presentation, her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. She hesitated for a moment, then opened it. "Meet me at 6. I need to talk to you about something important. Please don't ignore me." Her heart skipped a beat. "Don't ignore me?" The words felt personal, intense. What was he trying to say? Her mind raced as she debated whether to agree to the meeting. Could it be a business matter, or was he trying to make things more complicated? She glanced at her calendar. Her evening was free. Against her better judgment, she typed a quick reply. "Okay, see you at 6. The rest of the day dragged on. Jessica tried to focus on work, but the thought of meeting Ethan again made her nervous. She wasn't sure if she was ready to confront the feelings that had been bubbling beneath the surface. What was this connection? Was it just chemistry, or was there something deeper? At exactly 6 p.m., she walked into the small bistro where they had agreed to meet. The atmosphere was dimly lit, cozy, with a soft jazz tune playing in the background. She spotted Ethan immediately, sitting at a corner table, a glass of wine in front of him. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Jessica," he said, standing up as she sat down across from him. "I'm glad you came." There was an intensity in his voice that sent a shiver down her spine. She couldn't quite place it, but it was as if something was about to shift. Something big. "What's this about, Ethan?" Jessica asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes searching hers. "I didn't want to do this over text or email, but I think it's time you know the truth." Jessica felt her pulse quicken. The truth? What truth? A knot formed in her stomach as she braced herself for whatever was coming next. "I'm not who you think I am," he said softly, leaning in. And I need you to understand that, before this goes any further. Her mind raced. What was he hiding? And why was he telling her this now? Her heart hammered in her chest as she waited for him to continue. Jessica stared at Ethan, her breath catching in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Every instinct within her was telling her to run, to avoid whatever confession he was about to make. But she stayed rooted to her seat, unable to tear her eyes away from him. Ethan took another deep breath, his hands clenching around his glass of wine. He looked torn, as if he were struggling with whether or not to tell her the truth. "I didn't want you to find out like this, but I can't keep it from you any longer. My real name is not Ethan," he said quietly. Jessica's mind reeled, trying to make sense of his words. "What are you talking about? Who are you really?" Ethan glanced around the room, his eyes scanning the space as if he were looking for an escape. "I'm not just some entrepreneur looking to make a name for myself. I've been hiding my true identity from you, and I didn't mean for it to go this far." She felt her heart race as she leaned forward, trying to grasp what he was saying. "What do you want from me, then?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Why tell me now?" Ethan met her gaze, and his expression softened. "Because I trust you, and because there's something I've been keeping from you that might change everything. I'm not just a businessman. I'm connected to something much bigger than you think." Jessica's stomach twisted with confusion and fear. She had no idea what he was talking about. His words were cryptic, and yet they carried a weight that felt dangerous. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why the lies, Ethan?" Ethan looked down at his hands, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to think I was using you. But I've been trying to protect you, Jessica, from the people who are after me." Jessica felt her breath catch. "Who's after you?" she whispered. Ethan hesitated, as if he wasn't sure how much to say. "There are people who would do anything to bring me down, and I don't want you involved in any of this. I just wanted to keep you safe." Jessica's mind was spinning. Who was this man sitting across from her? And what kind of danger was he really in? She tried to steady herself, but the more he spoke, the more confused and overwhelmed she became. "So what now? What does this mean for us?" Ethan leaned in, his eyes locking with hers. "It means that you need to decide if you want to be a part of my world. But be careful, Jessica. Once you're in, there's no turning back." Jessica sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had always been a rational woman, someone who valued clarity and order. But now everything seemed murky, and Ethan's words were like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together. Who was he really? And why was he dragging her into this? "I don't know if I can just walk away from this, Ethan," she said quietly, her eyes locked on his. Her heart was pounding, but she couldn't let him see how shaken she was. She needed answers, not more confusion. Ethan sighed, rubbing his hand over his face in frustration. "I never wanted to drag you into this, but now that you know, there's no easy way out." His voice was filled with an urgency that sent a chill down Jessica's spine. "I'm involved with a group, Jessica. A group that has connections everywhere. And I'm the target." Jessica's mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. "You're telling me you're in danger because of some group?" she asked, her voice rising. "Why should I believe you?" Ethan leaned forward, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm not lying to you. This isn't some business game, Jessica. This is real. People have tried to hurt me before. I'm trying to keep you out of it. Keep you safe. Jessica swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions in check. She had always been able to handle anything that came her way. But this felt different. This was bigger than her, bigger than anything she had ever imagined. And if I stay, what happens to me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was terrified, but there was a part of her that was willing to listen, to believe in him. Ethan didn't hesitate. You get pulled into the chaos, he said flatly. You become a target just like me. The silence between them was heavy. Jessica felt her breath catch as she absorbed his words. The weight of the decision was almost too much to bear. Could she really walk away from everything she had worked so hard for? Could she risk it all for someone she barely knew? Ethan looked at her with a mixture of regret and hope in his eyes. I can't promise that everything will be okay, but I can promise that I'll do everything in my power to protect you. Jessica's heart raced as she weighed her options. She had always believed in her own strength, but was she strong enough to take on this danger? To be with him? To live with the consequences? She reached for her drink, trying to calm her nerves. I need time to think, she said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Ethan nodded slowly, his face hardening. Take all the time you need. Just know that time is running out. The next few days passed in a blur for Jessica. She couldn't concentrate on anything at work, her mind constantly drifting back to Ethan's revelation. The more she thought about it, the more confused she became. He seemed genuine, but the world he was describing was something out of a thriller movie, something she had no place in. She found herself standing in front of her apartment window late one evening, staring out into the city lights. She was torn. The rational part of her wanted to walk away from it all, forget about Ethan and the dangerous world he was involved in. But the part of her that had always been drawn to the unknown, to the excitement and unpredictability, couldn't let go. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up, her heart skipping when she saw Ethan's name on the screen. She hadn't heard from him since their last meeting. With a deep breath, she answered. Jessica. His voice was urgent. We need to talk. It's about the group. Her heart raced. What's going on? There's been a shift in their plans, Ethan said quickly. They're moving faster than I thought. If we don't act now, things will escalate, and I won't be able to protect you anymore. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean by act now? What do you want me to do? There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Ethan spoke again, his voice was heavy. I need you to trust me, Jessica. There's no other way. You're the only one who can help me stop this. But I need you to come to me. Now. Every part of her screamed to say no, to ignore him and walk away. But she couldn't. The connection between them was too strong. There was something in his voice, something that told her she couldn't let him face this alone. Where do you want me to meet you? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Parkview Street, near the old warehouse. I'll be waiting for you, Ethan replied. His tone softened slightly. Please, Jessica, don't back out now. She hung up the phone, her mind racing. What was she walking into? What had she gotten herself into by even agreeing to meet him? But she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again. With a deep breath, Jessica grabbed her jacket and headed out the door. The night was dark, and the streets were eerily quiet as she made her way to the meeting spot. Every step felt heavier, every moment more uncertain. But no matter what happened, she knew she couldn't turn back now. Jessica arrived at the old warehouse on Parkview Street, her heart pounding in her chest. The night air was cold, biting at her skin as she glanced around, her breath visible in the darkness. She had never been here before, but something about the place felt ominous, as though it had witnessed too many secrets and betrayals over the years. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, making her jump. She pulled it out, seeing a text from Ethan. "I'm inside. Be careful." She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, before making her way inside the warehouse. The large, rusted doors creaked as she pushed them open, stepping into the dimly lit interior. The place smelled of dust and decay, and the only sound was the faint echo of her footsteps against the concrete floor. "Ethan?" she called out, her voice breaking the silence. A shadow moved in the far corner, and then he appeared. Ethan, looking more serious than she had ever seen him. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet urgency that sent a chill down her spine. "Jessica," he said, his voice low. "I'm glad you came." She nodded, walking toward him. "What's going on, Ethan? What's so urgent that you needed me here?" Ethan's eyes scanned the room, as if checking for any signs of danger. "It's worse than I thought. They know I'm onto them, and now they're coming for both of us." A wave of fear washed over her. "What do you mean, coming for both of us? Who are they?" "The people I've been dealing with. They don't take kindly to anyone trying to cross them. And now that you know too much, you're in danger," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I never wanted you involved, but it's too late now." Jessica's heart raced. She had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable in her life. But there was a part of her that couldn't leave, couldn't turn her back on him, no matter how dangerous the situation was. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped closer, his expression hardening. "We fight back," he said, his voice filled with determination. "And we do it together." Jessica's pulse quickened. She wasn't sure what she was getting into, but one thing was clear. There was no going back. The silence in the warehouse was suffocating, but it was also filled with purpose. Ethan's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "We fight back." He said it with such conviction, like he had already accepted the risks, even if that meant dragging Jessica deeper into the chaos. Jessica's mind raced. Fight back? How? Against who? She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't trained to handle situations like this. She had always been in control of her life, of her choices. But now her world was unraveling, and she was standing at the edge of something she couldn't even begin to understand. "Ethan," she started, her voice shaky. "I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm not equipped for this. I've never been in a situation like this before." He stepped closer, his presence commanding. "Neither have I, Jessica. But you're already involved. You know too much. And you're too valuable for them to let go. They'll come after you whether you help me or not. But if you do, we have a chance." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "A chance at what? Survival?" Ethan nodded. "Exactly. I've spent years trying to play by their rules, trying to keep them at bay. But they're getting bolder, and the only way out is to make them believe we have something they can't touch. If we show them we're not afraid, that we can fight back, they'll hesitate." Jessica shook her head, the weight of his words sinking in. "And what happens when they don't hesitate? What happens when they come after us full force? We fight harder, Ethan said, his tone unwavering. We make sure they know they've messed with the wrong people, and we don't stop until we've won. Jessica felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had never thought of herself as a fighter. But in that moment, looking at Ethan, this man who had dragged her into his dangerous world, something inside her shifted. She didn't know if she was ready to fight, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't turn back now. Ethan extended his hand toward her. "Will you stand with me?" Jessica hesitated, her mind spinning, but then her eyes locked with his, and she saw the raw determination in his gaze. There was no turning back. Whatever lay ahead, she was in this now, whether she liked it or not. With a deep breath, she took his hand. "Let's do this." The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Jessica couldn't escape the constant feeling of being watched, like every step she took was under surveillance. Ethan's words from the night they met echoed in her mind. "We have to make them believe we're not afraid." But how could she not be afraid? Every instinct told her to run, to get away from this chaos, but her decision to stand by Ethan felt irreversible now. Ethan was different after their meeting at the warehouse. He seemed more distant, more focused, as if something had shifted inside him. It was like he was preparing for the storm he knew was coming. And the worst part was, Jessica wasn't sure if she was ready for it. The weight of the situation bore down on her shoulders. One evening, after a long day at work, Jessica received a text from Ethan. "Meet me at the usual spot. It's time." The usual spot was an old coffee shop a few blocks from her apartment. It was their safe haven, where they could talk without the prying eyes of anyone who might be watching. Jessica's heart raced as she made her way there. She didn't know what its time meant, but she had a sinking feeling it was about to get much worse. She arrived at the coffee shop, her senses heightened. The low hum of conversation and the smell of freshly brewed coffee did nothing to calm her nerves. Ethan was sitting at their usual corner booth, his expression grim. As soon as she sat down, he didn't waste time. "We need to move quickly," Ethan said, his voice tight with urgency. "They know we're planning something. They're closing in. If we don't act tonight, we're done for." Jessica's pulse quickened. "What do you mean tonight?" "I have a contact who's going to help us get what we need. It's risky, but it's our only shot," Ethan explained, his eyes scanning the room. "We're going to take them by surprise." Jessica nodded, though a part of her screamed to walk away. But she knew better now. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "What do we need to do?" Ethan leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're going to have to trust me, Jessica. Everything we've done so far, everything I've put you through, it's all led to this moment. Tonight, we fight back." There was no turning back. Tonight would determine their fate. Whether they would succeed or fall, one thing was clear. Nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The night air felt heavier than ever as Jessica followed Ethan through the dark alley. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, every footstep echoing louder than the last. The stakes had never been higher. Her heart raced in her chest, each beat a reminder of how far they had come and how close they were to the edge. Ethan's face was set, his expression unyielding, but Jessica could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched into fists by his sides. He was just as afraid as she was, but he wasn't showing it. The man who had pulled her into this mess had become someone she didn't fully understand anymore. But at the same time, He was the only person she trusted in this dangerous game they were playing. As they turned the corner, the dim light of a street lamp illuminated the figure waiting for them. He was tall, wearing a long coat and a hood that obscured his face, but Jessica recognized the aura of danger around him immediately. "Is this the contact?" she asked, her voice low. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, he's our best shot, but you need to be careful. He doesn't trust easily." The man didn't speak at first, his eyes scanning Jessica with cold precision. He then gave a slight nod. "Ethan, and you must be Jessica," he said, his voice gravelly. "We don't have much time. Let's get to business." Ethan stepped forward, pulling a small, unmarked envelope from his jacket pocket. He handed it over to the man, who took it without hesitation, his eyes darting from Ethan to Jessica. "What's in the envelope?" Jessica asked, her curiosity piqued. The man smirked, though it was devoid of humor. "It's everything you need to take them down. All the evidence, all the names. But you're not the only ones who want this. There are others, people even more dangerous than you can imagine, and they're going to come for you once they know you have it." Ethan looked at Jessica, his face serious. "This is our only chance to take them down. If we don't act now, they'll destroy everything we've worked for." Jessica's mind raced. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming, but there was no turning back. She had crossed a line, and now the only way out was through. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady, even though she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The adrenaline coursed through Jessica's veins as they made their way deeper into the shadows of the city. The information was now in their hands, but the weight of it was heavier than anything she had ever carried before. Every corner they turned, every step they took, she felt like they were being hunted. The danger had escalated to an unimaginable level, and yet the drive to make it out alive and to bring those responsible to justice kept her going. Ethan was quieter than usual, his mind clearly focused on what lay ahead. Jessica wanted to ask him what the next move was, but something in his eyes told her to stay quiet. He was a man on a mission, and his focus was sharp, unwavering. They reached the safe house, a nondescript building hidden between two abandoned warehouses. It was far from comfortable, but it was secure. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, Jessica felt a wave of relief wash over her. They were safe, at least for the moment. Ethan immediately went to the small table in the corner, where a laptop lay open, waiting for him. He slid the envelope across the table, carefully opening it. Inside were several flash drives, each labeled with a different name and date. He plugged one into the laptop and began to sift through the files. Jessica watched him in silence. She had never seen him so absorbed, so focused on a single task. She had seen Ethan in action before, but this felt different. There was a desperation in his movements, a need to make this right. "What's in the files?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. Ethan didn't look up, his fingers moving rapidly over the keys. Everything. Every dirty little secret they've been hiding. Money laundering, illegal deals, connections to politicians, law enforcement. You name it, it's all there. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a battle against a single corrupt organization. It was a war, one that had reached the highest levels of power. They were up against forces that could destroy everything if they knew what they were planning. As Ethan continued to dig through the files, Jessica felt a cold chill wash over her. They were playing with fire now, and one wrong move could burn everything to the ground. She had no illusions about the risks they were facing. Ethan looked up, his eyes hard. "We move tonight. If we don't act fast, They'll know we have it, and if they catch us with this, it'll be over for both of us. Jessica's heart raced, but she knew there was no other choice. It was now or never. The hours after Ethan's declaration felt like they were stretching on forever. Jessica couldn't shake the tension that gripped her chest. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, sent her mind into overdrive. They were moments away from risking everything, and she couldn't help but question if they were truly ready. Could they pull this off? Would they make it out unscathed? Or would they be swallowed by the very monster they were fighting? Ethan stood by the window, looking out into the darkness. His jaw was set tight, his eyes focused on something only he could see. Jessica knew he was calculating their every move, mentally mapping out the steps that would lead them to victory, or to their end. He turned towards her, his expression unreadable. "We can't waste any more time," he said, his voice low but firm. "The people we're up against don't play by the rules. If we hesitate, they'll come for us first." Jessica nodded, trying to push down the fear that threatened to rise in her throat. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. She had seen the darkness they were up against, the corruption, the lies, and she knew what it was doing to the world around them. It was all too much to ignore now. "You're right," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "What's the plan?" Ethan grabbed a few of the flash drives and slipped them into his jacket pocket. He moved with purpose, his movements precise. "We're going to the main office. We're getting the evidence to the right people, the ones who can take it and make sure the world knows the truth." Jessica felt a shiver run down her spine. The main office was a heavily guarded fortress, a place where only the most trusted people had access. Getting in would be near impossible, but Ethan seemed confident. She just hoped that confidence wasn't misplaced. "We'll have to move quickly," Ethan continued. "The longer we stay here, the more likely they'll find us. They know we have the evidence. They're already looking for us." Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. There was no turning back now. They had to take the risk or lose everything. Ethan looked at her one last time, his eyes searching hers. "Are you ready for this?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything they had gone through. Jessica took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready." And with that, they stepped out into the night, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The night was still and silent as Jessica and Ethan moved through the streets, their footsteps muffled by the dense fog that had settled over the city. The cold air bit at their skin, but it wasn't the chill that made Jessica's breath catch in her throat. It was the weight of the mission ahead. Every move they made, every turn they took, felt like they were drawing closer to a point of no return. Ethan had already briefed her on what was coming. The main office was heavily fortified, the security tighter than anything she had ever experienced. This wasn't just a job. This was a war, and they were the soldiers walking straight into enemy territory. As they approached the entrance to the building, Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. The sleek glass doors gleamed under the streetlights, but there was no welcoming warmth in the scene. It looked more like a fortress than a place of business. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Stay close. Trust no one." Jessica nodded, her fingers brushing the cold surface of the small device hidden in her pocket, the tool that would grant them access to the building's security systems. She felt the weight of it there, a small device that could either be their salvation or their doom. They reached the doors, and Ethan motioned for her to stand back. With a quick motion, He inserted the device into the hidden slot near the entrance. There was a soft beep, followed by the familiar click of the door unlocking. Jessica's pulse quickened as they slipped inside. The lobby was empty, the sterile white walls and polished floors reflecting the dim light from overhead. It felt like they were trespassing in a world that didn't belong to them. Jessica kept her head down, her breath shallow, as they moved silently through the corridors. Ethan led her to the elevator, and they stepped inside, the doors closing with a soft hiss. For a moment, they were both enveloped in the quiet hum of the lift as it ascended. Jessica could feel the tension between them, the weight of what they were about to do hanging in the air. She glanced at Ethan, his face hard as ever, but his eyes betrayed the fear that had settled there. As the elevator neared their destination, Jessica's mind raced. Every possible scenario played out in her head, each one more dangerous than the last. They couldn't afford a single mistake. The doors slid open, and Ethan motioned for her to follow. It was time. The elevator doors opened to a cold, sterile hallway. Jessica's heart pounded as she stepped out, trying to mask the nerves that threatened to overtake her. The walls were lined with sleek glass panels, reflecting their hurried movements. Every step felt like it echoed too loudly, but they couldn't afford to slow down now. Ethan moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of movement. The security systems were advanced, and he knew they had to act quickly. They couldn't afford to be caught now. The files they carried were worth everything, the truth about the corruption that had been hidden for so long. They reached the office doors, which were guarded by a high-tech biometric scanner. Ethan's fingers moved swiftly over the panel, a moment of tension passing between them. Jessica felt the weight of the situation, the reality that their entire mission hinged on this single moment. Ethan pressed a few more buttons, and then the scanner beeped, the door unlocking with a soft click. Jessica's breath caught as he turned the handle, and they slipped inside. The office was quiet, dimly lit by the soft glow of the city's lights outside. It was a place where deals were made, secrets were buried, and power was wielded in the shadows. They had come for the evidence, every document, every file that could expose the powerful figures who had been pulling the strings behind closed doors. Ethan moved toward the desk, rifling through drawers with practiced precision. Jessica kept watch, her senses heightened, every sound amplified in the silence of the room. Her eyes darted between the door and Ethan as he pulled out files, his expression tight with focus. "Almost there?" he muttered, his voice low. Jessica nodded, her hands shaking as she held onto the small device in her pocket. She was ready, but the fear of being discovered at any moment kept her on edge. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. As Ethan placed a final stack of documents into the bag, a sudden sound echoed from the hallway, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Jessica's pulse spiked. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're not alone." Ethan froze, his eyes widening. He grabbed Jessica's arm, pulling her toward the back exit of the office. They couldn't afford to be caught now. The mission had to succeed. The footsteps grew louder, and Jessica felt the walls closing in. It was now or never. The seconds felt like hours as Jessica and Ethan hurried through the back corridor. The footsteps outside the office door grew louder, the sound unmistakable. Someone was coming. They had no time to waste. Ethan pushed Jessica forward, his hand gripping hers tightly. "We need to move faster," he whispered urgently. His voice was low but tinged with the same sense of panic that Jessica felt in her chest. Their breaths were shallow, the cold sweat of fear already beginning to form on their skin. They reached the rear exit, a narrow door that led to the service elevator. Ethan's fingers flew across the keypad, punching in the code. Each beep echoed through the empty hallway, sending ripples of anxiety through Jessica. She could already hear the sound of the approaching guards, their voices muffled but unmistakable. "Come on," Ethan muttered as the door finally clicked open. They slipped inside, the darkness of the service elevator surrounding them. The doors slid shut with a soft whoosh, and Jessica exhaled sharply, trying to steady her breath. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the only sound the faint hum of the elevator moving downward. Jessica's heart raced as she tried to control the panic clawing at the edges of her mind. They had made it this far, but the journey was far from over. They still had to get out of the building, with no one the wiser. Ethan broke the silence, his voice low but firm. "We're almost there. Just keep your head down and stay quiet." Jessica nodded, her hands trembling as she clutched the bag of files tighter. The evidence they had collected was their only hope of bringing the corrupt system down. It felt like a heavy burden in her hands, but there was no turning back now. She had come too far. The elevator came to a halt with a jolt, and the doors opened to the dimly lit parking garage. Jessica's eyes scanned the area, making sure the coast was clear. The silence was unnerving, but it meant they had a small window of opportunity to escape. Ethan led the way, moving quickly and quietly, his eyes darting between the rows of parked cars. They had to make it to the exit, get to the car, and disappear before anyone realized they were gone. But just as they reached the car, a voice rang out from behind them. "Stop!" Jessica's blood ran cold. The guards had caught up. The word "stop" echoed in the stillness of the parking garage, freezing Jessica in place. She felt her heart skip a beat as her eyes darted to the source of the voice. 3 armed guards stood at the entrance of the garage, their hands already hovering over their weapons. Ethan's grip on her tightened, pulling her close as they both ducked behind the nearest car. The seconds felt like an eternity as they tried to blend into the shadows, holding their breath, praying the guards wouldn't see them. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper as he leaned toward her. "We can't let them take us. We need to run now." Jessica nodded, every muscle in her body tensed. The tension was unbearable as the guards stepped closer, their footsteps crunching on the gravel floor. They were too close, too exposed. Jessica's hand shook as she reached for her phone, her mind racing for a solution. There had to be something they could do. Then, in a split second, an idea sparked in her mind. She glanced at Ethan, who was watching the guards carefully, his face set in grim determination. "Wait for my signal," she whispered. Ethan gave a subtle nod, his eyes narrowing as he calculated their next move. The guards were now almost directly in front of them, too close for comfort. Jessica had one chance, and she knew she had to take it. With a deep breath, she slowly reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device. The device was a simple but powerful piece of tech that they had stolen from the office earlier. It was a signal jammer, capable of disrupting the security cameras and communications in the building. If they could use it right now, they might have a shot at escaping unnoticed. With trembling hands, she activated the jammer. There was a faint hum as it powered up, and then the garage lights flickered for a moment. In that split second, Jessica felt a rush of adrenaline. The guards didn't seem to notice the change immediately, but their movements became more erratic. "Now!" Jessica hissed. Ethan didn't hesitate. He bolted from behind the car, pulling Jessica with him. They sprinted through the garage, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the vast space. The guards turned just in time to see them running, but it was too late. The signal jammer had done its job, and the communication system was temporarily knocked out. The two of them made it to the car, throwing open the doors and jumping inside. Ethan slammed the engine into gear, and the car roared to life. They sped out of the garage, their escape a mere breath away from failure. But as they drove through the dark streets, Jessica knew they weren't out of danger yet. The road ahead was still filled with uncertainty, and their mission was far from over. The car sped through the empty streets, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened as they left the parking garage behind, but the tension in the air was far from over. Jessica could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on her chest. The danger not just a shadow, but a living, breathing thing in their rearview mirrors. Ethan glanced at her quickly. "We've got to go off the grid. It won't be long before they figure out we're gone. We can't trust anyone right now." Jessica nodded, her mind racing. The evidence they had was critical, but it also made them the targets of powerful people who would stop at nothing to keep it hidden. Her hands still trembled, not just from fear, but from the uncertainty of what came next. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was calculating, weighing options, his eyes scanning the road ahead. The city lights blurred in the distance, offering a false sense of safety. In reality, they were in more danger than ever. "I have a place," he finally said, his voice calm but urgent. "It's isolated. We'll lay low there until we figure out what to do next." Jessica turned to look at him. "You sure? How do you know we're safe?" Ethan's expression hardened. "I'm sure. It's the only option we have." The miles between them and the city seemed to stretch on endlessly, the night thick with silence. Jessica couldn't help but wonder who was pulling the strings behind all of this, who wanted to keep the truth hidden so badly that they'd send armed guards after them. The thought of it made her stomach turn. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Ethan took a sharp turn onto a narrow road, the car's tires crunching on gravel. The trees on either side of the road seemed to close in on them, the isolation of the place suffocating. A few minutes later, they arrived at a small, secluded house hidden behind tall fences and thick brush. "Welcome to the last place anyone would think to look for us," Ethan said, parking the car and turning off the engine. Jessica glanced at the house. It looked abandoned, quiet, too quiet. "Let's hope you're right," she said, trying to shake off the sense of unease that had settled in her bones. The silence inside the small house was deafening. Jessica stepped cautiously into the dimly lit room, her eyes scanning every corner as if expecting danger to leap out at any moment. The house was small but cozy, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile office buildings and fancy hotels they had been in just hours ago. It felt like a place where time stood still. Ethan led her to the back of the house, where a small kitchen opened into a living room. He motioned for her to sit on the couch. "We'll be safe here for now," he said, his voice low and steady, though his eyes betrayed a hint of worry. Jessica sat, her mind still racing. "Safe for how long, though?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. They were alone in a secluded house, but the danger wasn't over. It wasn't just the guards. They were up against powerful people, people who had no problem destroying anyone who stood in their way. Ethan leaned against the counter, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. But right now, This is the only place we can lay low. Jessica could feel the weight of the situation settling deeper into her bones. She had never imagined her life would come to this. She was just a regular woman, until now. Now she was tangled up in a web of lies, corruption, and danger. The evidence they had could expose everything, but it also made them a target. "I need to think," she said, standing up and pacing the room. "We have to figure out our next move. They're not going to stop looking for us." Ethan's eyes followed her every step. "I know, but rushing into anything right now is too dangerous. We have to lay low, keep our heads down, and figure out a plan. It won't do us any good to be reckless." Jessica stopped pacing, feeling the frustration bubble up inside her. She wanted to act. She wanted to take control and expose the people who had done this to her. But she knew Ethan was right. They needed to think, to plan. Just then, a loud knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Both she and Ethan froze, their eyes meeting in a shared moment of panic. "Stay here," Ethan whispered. "I'll check it out." As he moved toward the door, Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. Who could it be? Was it the authorities? Or worse, were they already closing in on them? Ethan peered through the peephole, his face turning pale. "It's them," he muttered. "We've been compromised." The blood drained from Jessica's face as she stood frozen, her mind racing to process the reality of the situation. "What do we do?" she whispered, the fear creeping up her spine like an icy hand. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes sharp with determination. "We can't panic. We need to stay calm and think. They're not here yet, but we don't have much time." The knock on the door came again, more urgent this time, followed by the sound of footsteps retreating. Ethan grabbed Jessica's arm, pulling her away from the door. "We can't let them know we're here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're too exposed. We have to leave." Jessica's thoughts spun in 1,000 directions, but the one thing that stood out was the look in Ethan's eyes. This wasn't just a small threat. They were in real danger. "We need to go out the back," Ethan continued, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "It's the only way to avoid them." They hurried through the back door and into the yard. The darkness enveloped them like a blanket, and Jessica felt her heartbeat in her throat. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was unbearable save for the sound of their footsteps. Ethan led the way, navigating through the dense trees and thick underbrush. The night seemed alive with every snap of a twig or rustling of leaves. Jessica's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, trying to think of a way out. But there was no clear answer, only the overwhelming sense that they were being hunted. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small dirt road. Ethan turned to her, his face grim. "We have to keep moving. They're going to search the house. We can't stay in one place for long." Jessica nodded, her voice shaky but determined. "Where do we go now?" Ethan hesitated. "I have an old friend. He's the only one I trust right now." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. "Who is he?" Ethan's eyes met hers, filled with both worry and resolve. "Someone who can help us disappear." As they hurried down the road, the night seemed to close in on them. Every shadow felt like a threat, and every sound was amplified. Jessica's mind was a whirlwind, but one thought kept repeating in her head. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop until they found them. And when they did, it would be too late.